Good evening. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and allow your breath to settle. Tonight, I'll be guiding you through 10 true, deeply unsettling, and sometimes tragic tales, each centered around one recurring theme: places of the dead, and what still lingers nearby. Whether these took place in old crumbling cemeteries or on sacred burial grounds long disturbed, they all share one thread: a quiet warning whispered to those who listen too closely. So, close your eyes and let's descend into Story 1. Story 1: The Caretaker's Guests. About 5 years ago, I worked as a part-time cemetery caretaker in a small rural town in northern Pennsylvania. You wouldn't find this place on any tourist map. Just fields, winding roads, and silence. The cemetery I tended sat on a hillside, tucked behind woods that had grown a little too wild over the years. It was said that the land had once been part of a Lenape burial site before it was sectioned off and purchased by settlers in the late 1800s. Most of the graves were stone and overgrown. No church nearby. Just a single maintenance shack, a gravel road, and rows of crumbling headstones. My job was mainly mowing grass, trimming hedges, and resetting the occasional toppled marker. It didn't pay much, but I liked getting away from town. There was something weirdly peaceful about it. Or at least there was. Until that July. It started as small things. Tools misplaced, the door to the shed left swinging open even after I'd locked it. I figured I was just being forgetful. The heat does that to you. But then came the knocks. Yes, knocks. 3 of them, always in patterns. On the rear side of the shed, the one facing the oldest part of the cemetery. I checked the first time. No one. It happened 2 days later, louder, faster. I sprinted out, thought maybe it was kids messing around. Empty again. I started parking closer to the shed. One night, I even stayed late, just to catch whoever it was. By 9:45 p.m., it was dead quiet. I had just given up and packed my bag when one of the big floodlights on the rear lot flickered violently, before going totally dead. The knock came again, rapid, frantic, and then something new. A voice, faint, female. Let him rest. Just once, right into my ear. I turned so fast I nearly fell over. There was no one behind me. I didn't sleep that night. Next morning, the ground was disturbed by plot 74. Overgrown, sunken in. The records showed it belonged to G.A. Madison, died 1889. I still remember the cause of death listed in cursive. Hanged for betrayal. We never received maintenance requests on that part of the land. No burials near there in decades. Still, I felt compelled to clean it. I cleared the leaves, trimmed the branches, and reset the crooked stone. As I did, something moved in the woods behind me. Not a squirrel or wind, but something walking. I froze. It stopped. I called out. Silence. I felt that presence for the rest of the week. Never saw anything. Just the sense one gets when eyes are glued to the back of your neck. By the time I quit 3 weeks later, I had permanent goosebumps any time I got near that rear patch. I visited once a year later. A small wooden cross had been placed at the foot of plot 74. Carved into it were the words, "You heard her." I took it as a warning, or maybe a thank you. I don't know, but I never went back. Story 2. The Clutch of the Earth. In 1999, I was stationed in Oklahoma for work and ended up renting a tiny house not far from an old Native American burial mound, one of many that dotted the state. It had been reduced to half its original height decades ago during land development, with much of it leveled and graded. People didn't talk about it much anymore. The lady who rented me the house said it used to be a sugar beet farm. But after a series of weird deaths in the 1940s, a fire, a machinery mishap, and a child drowning, the farm was shut down. I didn't care. I needed a place. It was cheap, isolated, had decent power and a roof over my head. I moved in thinking nothing of it. I'd even walk near the mound and eat lunch there. It felt still, warm even, like the air hung a little tighter near it, but not in an unfriendly way. That changed in October. I came home one night after a long drive to find my back door swung wide open, carpet soaked with dirty footprints, barefoot and not mine. I searched the place, top to bottom, bat in hand. Nobody. But all the windows were still locked from the inside. Then the humming began. It would start around 2 a.m., low and rhythmic, like a chant, just barely above a whisper. It came from beneath my floorboards. And here's the thing. The basement had been gutted years ago. No way down, just insulation and plywood. Things escalated. Objects moved. My bed was smeared with wet dirt one night. Always that same earthy smell. The worst part? I started dreaming of the same man. Tall, face never clear, standing ankle deep in soil, arms crossed. He never moved, just watched me. Each night, a little closer. One dream, he reached forward. When I woke up, my wrist was clenched tightly against the mattress, bruised, as if held by something invisible. I contacted a local elder through a friend. I gave her a small bundle of tobacco in exchange for her time. After I explained everything, she told me plainly, "The land remembers, but now it remembers you. You slept on its edge and didn't ask." I begged her to help. She told me to leave offerings, cornmeal, cedar, and to speak aloud when I came and went. I did what she said. The dreams faded, the chanting stopped, but sometimes, if I pass through the outskirts of that town, my mouth tastes like dust and cedar. It's like it doesn't want to let go. Story 3. The Girl of Healer's Hill. There's a hill in Rockingham County, Virginia, out past Route 42, that locals call Healer's Hill. It's not on any faff, and there's not much left of it but grass, a crumbled fence, and one sunken patch of earth that looks more like a forgotten garden bed than a grave. The hill was once a sacred place, said to be where medicine women were buried generations before colonists arrived. In their time, the women were seen as bridges between the earth and spirit. Now, they're warnings. I learned this the hard way. When I was 15, I went up there on a dare with 2 friends. It was Halloween, and we thought it'd be funny to film a fake seance and post it online. We brought candles, a cheap spirit board, and way too much arrogance. We lit the candles, said some nonsense words, and when nothing happened, started making jokes. Loud ones. That's when the wind kicked up. Fast and cold. But only around us. The candles stayed lit. My friend Mike reached down to press the board, but his finger froze in place mid-air, like he'd hit a wall. No one moved. His face went pale. Then, the air snapped. A loud cracking echo, and a scream. Not ours. A child's. We bolted. Didn't grab the board, didn't grab the camera. Mike never spoke about what he felt that night, but 3 weeks later, he dropped out of school. Started getting nosebleeds. His room always smelled like hot iron. He kept whispering in his sleep, "She's still watching me." I don't know what we woke up, or who. Only that the hill still stands, and no grass has grown over that one sunken spot. The one they say isn't a grave, but a doorway. Sometimes, it opens just a little, and when it does, someone always ends up broken. Story 4. The Pine Creek Choir. My grandfather used to tell me a story about something that happened in 1967 just outside of Pine Creek, Montana. It was where he grew up. A quiet spot with one gas station, one bar, and a small family cemetery pressed up against the edge of a pine forest. Most folks there were descendants of the original settlers. But the land, he always reminded us, wasn't ours. It never was. The town had been built adjacent to Blackfeet territory, and more specifically, beside a known burial site that dated back centuries. A mound tucked just beyond the tree line, marked only by a smooth stone carved with symbols that no one in town could translate. They called it the choir stone because, on especially quiet nights, something like singing could be heard from that direction. No lyrics, just soft melodious humming, like voices that never needed to breathe. Grandpa said he only heard it once. He and his brother Harold used to sneak out at night and climb the old ranger's tower that overlooked the trees. They'd bring a canteen and try to spot shooting stars. One night that summer, they heard the humming. At first, they assumed somebody brought a radio into the woods, but the longer they listened, the more unnatural it became. Voices, yes, but too many, too perfect in harmony. Grandpa said it sounded bigger than the forest, too big for any group of humans to carry. Then, the sounds shifted, and the melody didn't just get closer, it got beneath them. The tower began to vibrate, just slightly, and every hair on Grandpa's arm stood upright. Then Harold turned, eyes wide, and said, "There's someone under the ground. Not around them. Not below the tower, but under the earth." They climbed down in silence and walked home without another word. They didn't return to the tower for the rest of the summer. Years later, When Harold was in his 40s, he was diagnosed with rapidly worsening schizophrenia. He claimed the voices returned every time he ignored them long enough, that the songs changed, that one day they'd be sung in his language. Harold disappeared in 1993. His car was found near the base of the Ranger's Tower. Keys still in the ignition. Inside the cabin was a tape recorder with 6 minutes of audio. It was humming. Dozens of voices. Not tuneless, not chaotic. Harmonized. Rhythmic. Almost joyful. The last 20 seconds of the tape, though, was silent until a whisper said, "He came." So, we sang. The tape is kept in a locked box in my uncle's attic. I've heard it once. Never again. Sometimes when a storm rolls in and the air gets heavy, I swear I hear that melody in the wind. Grandpa told us never to answer the choir stone with our own voice. "Let the earth sing alone," he'd say. Or it might ask you to sing back. Story 5. The Gravedigger's Regret. In 2015, I took a temporary job in Utah as a cemetery assistant. The man who trained me, David, had been there over 20 years. He looked like every old cowboy you'd expect to keep shovels in perfect rows and refer to headstones as stories without the middle. He was quiet most of the time, until I asked about one specific corner of the cemetery, northwest end near the fence. The graves there had a blood-red hue to the soil, just maybe 3 or 4 plots, old, early 1900s. David just muttered, "That's where the trouble's buried." Nothing else. Later that week, I was assigned to help open a new plot nearby. We weren't disturbing any of the older graves, just planting one next to them. We marked the ground, measured spacing, and started shoveling. About 3 feet into the ground, the dirt changed, turned thick, oddly wet despite no recent rain. Smelled like burnt almonds and rust. And then the shovel hit glass. We both paused, thought it might be trash dumped long ago. I leaned in, cleared away the dirt, and revealed the edge of a jar, like an old mason container. Inside, something floated. At first, I thought it was a root. Then I saw a human finger, severed at the second knuckle. Skin still perfectly preserved. No tag, no label. Just floating, staring back at me like it waited to be found. David quietly covered it, refilled the dirt, dusted the plot gently with his gloved hands, then turned to me and said only this: "We stop digging now." No explanation, no call to authorities, just a quiet return to the office. That evening, I looked up the old ledgers, eager to understand whose graves lined that slope. Turns out 3 of the plots were all marked unclaimed. Odd entries, all signed off by a local judge in 1908, following reports of witchcraft practices involving preservation rituals. Claims were shaky, borderline fabricated. Only one of the names matched a local family. The other 2 were left blank. A week later, I came back to the shed early. David wasn't answering his phone. I found him sitting alone at the plot we'd half dug, freshly sealed over. He looked pale. He held something in his hand, Another jar, he whispered. Glass. Inside it was a tooth. He turned to me, eyes hollow. There'll be more. He quit the next day. I stayed another 2 months. Not once did I hear anyone mention the northwestern graves again. And despite several funeral services scheduled near that side, every single family requested relocation closer to the chapel instead. Nobody digs there anymore. And I've stopped asking why. Story 6. One headstone too many. My cousin Elijah was hired on a seasonal contract to map out a historic cemetery in northern Arizona. Mostly a research job, photographing, cataloging, matching archives for a local heritage project. Typical stuff. Until he found a headstone with no record. No official documents, no burial entry, no family listing. The plot was blank for decades on paper, but not in the ground. The headstone read, "To the watcher below, may you never rise, may we never forget." He'd never seen anything like it. The locals shrugged it off. Some said it had been there forever. A few said it had shown up overnight after a bad flood in the 1980s. Curiously, the soil around it was sunken, as if whatever was below had shifted. Elijah, being curious, started digging, just shallowly, to see if there was anything there. He found only roots at first, then a fragment of slate, then bones. But these didn't look like coffin bones. They were curled, like fetal position, too deep, too misshapen. But the strangest part was the tunnel, small but deliberate, that ran diagonally beneath the plot, into the forest beyond. When he shone a flashlight in, it reflected back, not light, not eyes, just a shimmer, like a wet wall that breathed. Elijah left that night. He locked the cemetery gates and never finished the map. Later, a retired ranger told him that no one was buried in that plot. It was sealed against something already there. They put that stone there as a reminder. He asked why they didn't remove it. The ranger said, because then we'd forget why that ground's cursed, and eventually someone would open it. Story 7. Voices from the Stone Circle. In the shadow of the San Juan Mountains in Colorado, there's a forgotten place the locals call the Stone Circle. You won't find it marked on any map, and the only way to get there is by hiking 2 hours through brush so thick it slices your legs if you're not careful. My Uncle Sam, a dedicated outdoorsman and amateur historian, first told me about it. He said he stumbled across it in 2003 while mapping trails for a conservation group. He thought it was a fire pit at first, until he looked closer. The stones weren't remnants. They were arranged, deliberately, precisely, evenly spaced in a near-perfect circle 10 feet wide. Smaller rocks inside the ring were etched with carvings. Geometric patterns not quite Native American, not quite Celtic. And from the center of the circle rose a single, narrow stone, weathered far differently than any boulder in the area, with what looked like a face worn into one side, not carved, worn, like it had emerged naturally from centuries of being stared at. Sam didn't touch anything, but when he returned to the site later with a camera, things changed. It started during the second visit. He set up his gear, took basic landscape shots, everything normal. Then, when he checked the playback, something flickered in the still frame. Not a shadow, not a glitch. A figure, crouched, not standing, featureless, just dark. Darker than shadows could explain. He deleted the photo, chalking it up to lens haze. But the next night, his cell rang at exactly 3:11 a.m. An unknown number, no ID. He picked it up and only heard breathing, wet, staggered breathing, and after 30 seconds, chanting. Several voices, low, muttering in sync. He hung up. It happened again the night after, again at 3:11 a.m. This time, he heard something different in the background. Clicking stones, like someone tapping rocks together. He stopped answering. A few days later, he nearly burned his house down. Woke to find all the windows open. A trail of small, round stones leading from his bed to the front door. He called me that morning, voice raspy with fatigue. I remember what he said because I wrote it down. There's something in that circle, and I didn't ask before walking through it. That was the mistake. I stepped inside its memory. Uncle Sam doesn't hike alone anymore. He returned once with a local tribal guide, someone who knew the deeper history of the land. The man took one look at the photos and told Sam point blank, "That's not for us." That was a place of watching. The ones before used stone to mark where the dead still waited. Not to protect us from them, but to protect them from us. Sam destroyed the photos, burned them, deleted the files, but his house, to this day, sometimes plays the stone tapping sound from inside the walls. There's never anything there, just the clicks, quiet, patient, like they're counting something or someone. Story 8. The Fence Row at Salt Hollow. I grew up in southwestern Missouri. In a small area most people just call Salt Hollow. It's all farmland and shallow creeks, and people mostly keep to themselves. My grandparents' place backed up to a long overgrown fence line that stretched for nearly a mile. Rusted posts, bent wire, nothing special, except one corner, where the fence bent westward. A solitary tree stood bent at the root, almost like it was bowing toward the earth. Beneath it were old stones, half buried, unmarked except for a few fading symbols. Local folklore claimed it was a burial site, not for townsfolk, but for those who'd died while trespassing or committing some kind of taboo. My great-grandmother just called it the end of the line. We weren't allowed to play near it. I followed that rule until I was 15. That summer, I got curious. One evening, I walked there alone. The air was unnaturally still, swampy, like breathing through a wet cotton rag. The leaves didn't rustle. Even the cows had gone quiet. I circled the tree, saw 4 old stones arranged in a square. I knelt and brushed away some moss. A tiny glyph was etched in the center. A spiral with 7 points, like a wheel missing a spoke. As I touched it, my fingers burned just briefly. Not pain exactly. More like a static surge that stopped my breath for a second too long. Then I felt it, heat rising beneath the soil. A pulse, like the earth inhaled. I ran back, didn't stop until I hit the porch. That night my dreams turned feverish. I saw the tree, dug beneath it, found bones not buried, stacked, clean and white like ivory. When I woke, my palms were covered in dirt, and my feet were stained as if I'd walked barefoot through mud. My grandmother didn't scold me, but she just brought out an old wooden box and set it on the table. Inside were bones, bird bones, twine, ashes, and a long blackened nail. She made me carry the box to the fence row and bury it at the base of the bent tree, exactly where I had knelt. She didn't speak during the walk, only said this when we were done. Some burials don't end with peace. You walk it without offering. Apologizing is all that still binds the gate. After that day, the tree never bent any further, but a deep crack formed across its trunk, too wide, too black to be from weather. I moved away years later, but every time I visit home, I notice that nothing green grows in a 5-foot circle around that tree now. It's like the earth is waiting for someone else to forget their manners. Story 9. The Custodian's Closet. When I worked security for a remote desert university, my main assignment was night patrol of the old chapel and adjacent cemetery. The cemetery, while school-owned, was originally a sacred plot used by the local Apache tribe long before the college was built. The land was purchased back in the 1920s under a very one-sided deal, and there had been tension ever since. The cemetery had long since been modernized with brickwork pathways and standardized plots. But one corner, the oldest one, remained untouched. Mostly desert sand and stone piles. No markers, just long shadows near the base of a dry riverbed. We weren't supposed to go near that corner. One night during winter break, I got a maintenance call about a door swinging open in the chapel basement. I went down with keys and flashlight, kicking dust and loose gravel all the way to the custodian's closet. The door was open, just like they said. But inside, there was sand, more than dust, a heap of it. Fresh footprints led in, but not out. Footprints shaped wrong, long and thin. 4 toes, not 5. The lights above buzzed, then dimmed just slightly, and for 1/2 second, something moved deeper inside the closet. It looked like it had no skin, just red sinew and bone moving like it didn't understand its own weight. I fled. Following protocol, I logged my report and called the on-duty supervisor. He didn't even hesitate before saying, "Was it the old storage wing?" I said yes. "Was it near the burial corner?" Again, I said yes. He sighed, like this wasn't the first time. "Leave it open. If it walks back out, better there than somewhere tighter." I never went back. But I did try to research that wing. An archived article buried in the regional paper mentioned unauthorized digging during the original chapel's expansion in 1946, including the incident of a workman who was found slumped over inside the wall frame. Not dead, but not alive either. Catatonic, limp, eyes wide open until the day he died 10 years later. Turns out his last journal entry just read, "Something opened inside the sand." Story 10. Where the Ashes Lie. Back in 2013, I was doing photojournalism for a small regional publication in Oregon. We were working on a piece about vanishing rural communities and came across a near-empty town called Crooked Elm. It had maybe a dozen residents left. No school, no gas station. Just a church, a diner that was never open, and a cemetery behind a field of wheat as dry as bone. Locals told us the cemetery had been moved once, that a fire in the 1920s had burned down a large section of the town, including part of the original cemetery, and that the townspeople had gathered what they could: ashes, broken pieces of stone, even unrecognizable family heirlooms, and relocated it half a mile southeast. They called it the grave of the forgotten because no one could say for sure which person ended up where. We visited the new site second. It wasn't much, just a winding gravel path that dipped between two hills, leading to a wide flat tract of land dotted with makeshift wooden crosses, metal rods with tags, and a few stone slabs too worn for names. I brought my camera and walked through alone. About 10 minutes in, I saw something strange. A low, concrete box with no label, no markings, and no lid. What was even weirder was that it was warm. The sun had dipped almost entirely below the hills, but the box radiated warmth. Leaning over it, I noticed the contents weren't dirt, but a fine gray powder. Warm to the touch. Too warm. I took a photo. The camera shut off. Battery drained, though it had been nearly full. I switched to my phone, snapped a picture, but the screen flickered, and then the photo wouldn't save. Just a corrupted file error. I chalked it up to tech being tech. Later that night, while editing footage and reviewing shots, I opened every file we had. And then I heard it. A whisper. Beneath the wind, captured by the mic. Almost missed it, but it looped twice. Something like a woman's voice, fragile, strained. "Don't forget where I burned." I froze. Replayed it 5, 10, 20 times. Same exact tone, same pace, no break in the audio file before or after. We hadn't interviewed any women that day. I started researching that cemetery again. Drove back 2 days later. The box? Gone, not moved. Vanishes. No impressions in the grass. No disturbed soil. I asked a local named Helen, who owned the diner. She squinted, then told me, "They built that grave on burnt bones, dust of 100 without names. Some nights, it still tries to come back together in the shape of something human." I haven't returned since, but from time to time, I'll dream of that place, of fingers rising from piles of ash, trying to reshape their name, trying to be remembered. Story 11. The Veterans Lot. In 2021, I briefly worked with a contractor responsible for final verification of military headstones before placement in cemeteries. It's solemn work, quiet. You ship stones, double-check spellings, ranks, branch insignia, and then sign off. Most people doing the job have a deep respect for the process. But one name showed up that didn't belong. Private William D. Grafton, U.S. Army, shipped from a stone-cutting facility in Tennessee. Everything perfect, except two details. No record of his death, no record of his service. Now, missing files sometimes happen with very old records. But this wasn't old. The order came in 4 months earlier. Had to be recent, and the delivery was to a cemetery in South Dakota. One not currently open to new burials that year. I phoned the regional office, got passed up the chain. No one had ever approved the name. Thing is, the stone got placed anyway. I was on site for another inspection a month later and drove by the veterans' lot. Most headstones were white, clean, lined up perfectly. Grafton's was at the far corner, slightly tilted and damp, as though recently scrubbed despite no rain that week. As I approached, I got cold. Not just goosebumps. Bone cold. My lungs felt full of frost. And the closer I came, the louder one sound became. Marching. But only in one ear. Left ear only. Like someone was marching in circles around me, but only inside my mind. I knelt to inspect it. The earth trembled just slightly, more like a breath being slowly taken. The inscription was textbook perfect, except for a single quote at the bottom that hadn't been in the paperwork. Gone twice, once by bullet, again by silence. Creeped out, I called one of the project leads. They told me plainly, pull the stone, bring it back. I returned 2 days later with a truck, only to find it had sunk, half the stone now buried. Stonecutter chalk marks scrubbed away. I went to file the removal paperwork, but the name was gone from the system. Removed completely, no trace. But I know Private Grafton existed. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe someone wanted him to. Maybe something only in that cemetery remembered him and put the stone there itself. Story 12. Eyes Between the Trees. There's a cemetery about 15 miles outside of Santa Fe that used to serve as the main burial site for the Pueblo peoples before European settlers forced assimilation. After state expansion, a new cemetery was built nearby, and the original was left fenced off and largely ignored, considered archived religious property. My friend Julia and I are both part of a local anthropology group. In 2018, we received permission to document and 3D model pre-colonial grave sites for cultural preservation. That cemetery was on our list. We arrived just after dawn. Trees lined the perimeter like odd sentinels. Thick, short, and twisted, like they'd grown into each other. We weren't there an hour before we noticed something weird. Our mapping posts, 6 orange flags set to mark each cardinal direction, kept shifting slightly. We assumed it was wind, but the ground didn't show signs of resistance, and no breeze reached us through those trees. Then Julia whispered, "Do you see that?" In the space between 2 thick tree trunks, maybe 40 feet away, Something blinked. A pair of glowing white orbs. Not flashlight reflection, not animal glint. They didn't shine back. They glowed inward, like heatless bulbs. They closed once, opened again, then vanished. We left early. That night, Julia texted me twice, both times saying she couldn't sleep. Between 2 and 3 a.m., she said she heard knocking outside, then whispering inside her walls. I tried to comfort her, tell her maybe it was stress. But then, it happened to me. The following night, 3:06 a.m., 3 knocks. Then a voice inside the hallway. Not loud, but there. You pinned them without asking. My heart stuttered. I refused to go back. 2 weeks later, Julia emailed the tribal liaison to apologize and asked to return the data we'd gathered. The liaison said, "It's not about the data, it's about silence. Some sites demand it." We deleted everything. Julia moved away not long after. She told me something I still carry in my mind, almost like a riddle. Some graves don't hold bodies. They hold watchers, and nobody thinks to cover a watcher's eyes. Story 13. The Boy Under the Chapel. When I was attending college in upstate New York, I took a campus job as a library assistant. It was decent work, until budget cuts shuffled staff around, and somehow I was assigned to do filings out of the administration wing. Specifically, a dusty records closet located beneath this old chapel. The building was Gothic Revival, built sometime in the mid-1800s. Beautiful from the outside, but inside, it always smelled like old wood, hot stone, and something a little sour. One evening, about 2 weeks into the assignment, I stayed late, organizing microfilm reels, when I started hearing something. Footsteps. Not walking normally, more like dragging. A shuffle, soft, almost like when a toddler moves clumsily, not fully sure of their own weight. At first, I laughed, thought maybe it was one of the other students trying to mess with me. But the sound kept going, circle after circle, always just a few feet behind the filing cabinets, pacing. I finally called out, "You got me, come on out." Nothing. Then the dragging stopped. I heard whispering, high-pitched, childlike, coming from within the back storage shelf. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and pulled aside the curtain that separated 2 record drawers, expecting to see someone hiding. Nothing. Only a single leather shoe, small, torn, dusty brown. I picked it up. The sole was burnt completely off. Marked inside the tongue was a set of initials, R, L, and the year 1903. Sick to my stomach, I tried to push it all away, placed the shoe on the shelf, and left. When I returned the next morning, the shoe was gone. Later, I confided in our campus archivist, an older gentleman named Mr. Ely. He didn't laugh, didn't joke. He just asked, "Did he walk 3 times?" I said, "What?" He said, "The boy who died in the fire. Chapel furnace exploded in 1903. He was trapped in the crawl space under where you're working. His spirit." circles 3 times before showing himself. I wanted to believe it was a legend, an urban myth whispered for drama. But Mr. Ely opened a drawer, pulled out a file, and dropped it in front of me. Photos, ash-covered bricks, and in one picture, a tiny shoe, just like the one I found. Later that night, I returned to the closet to get my sweater. As I reached for the door, I stopped. From behind it, shuffle, 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 exactly 3 times. Then silence. I left that job the same night. Story 14. The Dust Keeper. 3 years ago, I inherited a small plot of land in southern Arizona. It came from a relative I'd never met. Some distant great uncle who passed with no children and designated the property to next of kin willing to take it. It was desert land, middle of nowhere. I figured I'd hold on to it and maybe sell in a few years if the market moved. Then I visited. Tiny trailer, a broken windmill, and in the corner of the yard, surrounded by stones, was a square made of cedar stakes tied with rope, resembling a kind of boundary marker. Inside it, dust, perfectly flat. No wind swept through it, no animals disturbed it, and nailed to a post was a weathered wooden sign. Do not cross. The dust keeps the dead still. I laughed. Grim humor. Sure, my uncle must have had a weird streak. But when I stepped near it, I thought I heard breathing, low and dry, like gravel grinding under breath. A neighbor drove by as I was unloading my stuff and warned me not to move the stakes. That's old tribal ground, he said. Your uncle was its last keeper. Didn't cross it once in 40 years. I didn't believe in curses, but just to be respectful, I left it alone. That night, the wind picked up. Sandstorm level gale. But as I watched from the trailer window, that square of dust, untouched, still, not a single grain moved. I slept poorly, dreamed of footsteps moving across the desert, getting closer. Saw skeletal figures chanting in tongues as they paced in a circle just outside that dust patch. Next morning, when the sun rose, there were footprints. Hundreds of them. Tiny, narrow, some long and jagged like claws. They circled the dust square, but never entered. In the center of the square was a new cedar stake, freshly driven into the ground. It held a tag. One more night. I packed my things and left without hesitation. I returned twice since. Both times, there were more stakes, each one labeled with a date. I looked up the last recorded one. It's today's date. I don't plan to visit again. Some graves are marked with stone. Some are marked with boundaries. And some, like that square in the desert, are marked by what refuses to be buried until it's bound in silence. Story 15. The Girl Beside the Cross. A few years ago, my friend Matteo took a photography job for an old Catholic mission in Southern California. They were restoring the chapel for historical preservation and asked him to take timeline photos before, during, and after development. The days were long, dusty, but peaceful. One afternoon, while shooting near the garden cross, a 14-foot wooden crucifix set just outside the graveyard perimeter. He noticed something in his lens blur. At first, he assumed it was the light. But when he shifted angles, it became clear. There was something standing at the base of the cross. A girl. Pale dress, long black hair, feet beige. She didn't move, didn't blink. He snapped a photo instinctively, then lowered his camera. No one there, still. When he developed the role, she was clearly visible, facing sideways, one hand gently laid against the crossbeam. He asked the church historian if they kept costumes for reenactments or religious visuals. They said no. Then he noticed something chilling. In early records of the cemetery, dated long before photography, was a charcoal sketch of a girl buried near the chapel. Name: Maria Consuela. Died aged 9 in 1824. Consumed by fever and sadness. The sketch: same girl, same position, same dress. Mateo returned once more at dusk, hoping to understand or maybe say goodbye. He stood beneath the cross and whispered a prayer. No light shift, no movement. But when he developed his final roll of photos, one image stood out. The girl, in the same position, only this time, eyes turned directly to the lens. There were no footprints beneath her, just sand, slightly moved, as if she were fading inward or outward. Mateo gave the photo to the mission, and to this day, it hangs in their museum. But the face has changed. She no longer reaches out toward the cross. She gazes instead outward, watching, waiting for someone else to stand in her place. Story 16. When the Sangre Weeps. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains in New Mexico are known for their beauty, their rugged silence, and their deep ties to tribal and spiritual traditions. That's where my cousin Thomas lived for most of his life, working as a caretaker for a Jesuit retreat nestled along the ridge. Quiet job, small staff, mostly retirees and volunteers. But just behind the chapel was a field they never mowed. Wild grass, windswept sage. It looked untouched, natural, almost too perfect. At the edge of that field sat 12 flat stones, half buried and unmarked. Thomas noticed them one spring afternoon when he took a shortcut. He asked Father Miguel, the priest in charge, what they were. The old man's expression dropped. "They're not ours," he said. "They predate the land. We leave them be." Thomas wasn't the kind to push boundaries. But with time, his curiosity got the better of him. He began taking quiet walks near dusk, passing by the stones, watching shadows lengthen around them. Then the dream started. People standing around him in the dark, eyes closed, faces cracked like parched clay, chanting with their mouths sewn shut. The language was rhythmic, ancient yet incomprehensible. The dust in the dreams burned when it touched his feet. One figure always stood closer than the rest. A tall man with no eyelids who opened his mouth and nothing came out. When Thomas described the dreams to Miguel, the priest grew quiet, then told him something that to this day he never repeats. Whatever it was, it shook him. A few days later, Thomas approached the stones again. Only this time, he noticed something else. The dew surrounding the stones was red. Not blood, but red enough to see in the morning light. Like the ground had wept. He swore he heard whispers when the wind blew across that field. Not forward, but backward. As if time was leaking up through the soil. He resigned a week later. His last night there, a windstorm tore through the retreat. Power flickered. Phones died. One of the field volunteers, a new arrival to the region, had ventured into that meadow by mistake trying to find a lost dog. She returned barefoot, dirty, clothes torn, lips blistered and bleeding like she'd been trying to scream through barbed wire. And she had a word scratched into her palm, backwards. Remember. Thomas now lives 2 states away. He keeps a dish of sage on every windowsill, and to this day, he refuses to sleep with dirt beneath his fingernails. Story 17. The Ledger of Bones. In the archives of a small-town courthouse in western Kansas sits a ledger, brown leather, cracked, forgotten, at the bottom of a file drawer. It shouldn't be there. It predates the courthouse itself. The cover reads, Burial Index, Johnson Hollow Cemetery, September 1803. I was there doing research for a historical preservation project, looking through birth and death certifications. I only found the ledger by accident. Slipped behind county documents from the 1930s. Curious, I opened it. Inside were pages upon pages of names, ages, cause of death. Normal at first. Then strange entries began. Name, M-R. Age, 6 days. Cause, silence answered the knock. Name, unspoken. Age, not born / never dead. Cause, hung between dusk and breath. Name, mirror walker. Age, uncounted. Cause, stepped where no foot should echo. There were dozens like this. Impossible, irrational deaths that read more like riddles or warnings than records. Then I saw the ink begin to run. Not all at once, just one line. A fresh name, wet to the touch, forming by itself. Name, one who reads. I slammed the book shut. It was ice cold. Worse, the inside of the drawer was lined with scorched wood. Blackened, but not burnt through, as if it had resisted fire sometime in the distant past. I took a photo of the cover. The LED screen on my phone fractured. A spiderweb crack forming even though I hadn't dropped it. The ledger still there. Or, I assume it is. I never went back. But I keep fearing I'll find a new entry written in its pages. One that already knows where I'll be buried, and worse. How? Story 18. The Dirt Cradle. In the far reaches of North Dakota sits a place called Lawn Hollow. A dry, flat strip of land with views so open, it feels like the sky itself is crawling down to meet you. My sister and I inherited a crumbling farmhouse out there after an uncle passed. We went to clean it out, pick over photos and letters, maybe salvage what we could before selling. On the second day, we found a spot behind the barn. a depression in the ground about the size of a playpen, surrounded by odd little sticks tied with cotton ropes, barely half a foot deep. Inside it, nothing. Just dirt. My sister said jokingly, "Must be some kind of witch's baby crib." We both laughed. Until that night, she woke me up at 3 a.m. "I heard a baby crying," she said. I followed her outside. Cold air, crickets, quiet. Then, faintly, a whimper, high, fragile, lingering just past the barn. We walked softly around the side. The depression in the dirt. Something had been there. Trace outlines, not of a child, of hooves, long, narrow. Not like any animal I've seen. We stayed quiet, didn't disturb it again. Our last night, the front porch had been covered in soil, thinly scattered, deliberately laid. In it, 2 handprints, baby-sized but clawed. We left at dawn. Before we finished the drive out of Lawn Hollow, my sister looked back one final time and swore she saw the dirt cradle rise and fall, like something was breathing in it. I still wonder what was supposed to grow in that soil, and who, or what, would have called it family. Some say the dead are silent, neatly buried under names, stones, and time. But tonight, we were reminded otherwise. From chanting winds to footprints in freshly turned soil, to whispers hidden inside chapel walls. These were more than just ghost stories. They were warnings, echoes of places where memory clings to the dirt and refuses to fade. Places where stepping just a little too close, listening a little too long, might mean you become part of the next tale someone whispers about in the dark. So if you ever find yourself near a burial mound, an unmarked stone row, or a cemetery just a little too quiet, remember this: graves don't always hold the forgotten. Sometimes they hold the watchers, and sometimes they listen back. If you made it this far, you're braver than most. If you enjoyed tonight's journey through true disturbing cemetery and burial ground horror stories, consider subscribing. I post eerie, immersive stories every week. So if you enjoy curling up at night with tales you'll still be thinking about by morning, you're in the right place. Like the video, if it chilled you, share it with a friend you dare to walk through a dark cemetery with, and let me know in the comments. Have you ever heard the dead calling your name? Until next time, stay safe, speak softly in sacred places, and good night.